Good day, everyone. Welcome to our third week of online learning for the fourth quarter. Our topic is economy, society, and cultural change. Our objectives for today's lesson: after going through this module, you are expected to first, analyze economic organization and its impact on the lives of people in the society. Second, examine stratification from the functionalist and conflict perspectives. And third one, identify characteristics of the systems of stratification. The economy as foundation of social life. The importance of economic structure, according to Karl Marx, the father of scientific socialism, famously stated in his preface to a critique of political economy, the most controversial assertion in sociology. Social production of their life, men enter into definite relations that are indispensable and independent of their will. These relations of production correspond to a definite stage of development of their material forces of production. The total of these relations of production constitutes the economic structure of society, the real foundation, on which rises a legal and political superstructure, and to which corresponds definite forms of social consciousness. The mode of production of material life determines the social, political, and intellectual life process in general. It is not the consciousness of men that determines their being, but, on the contrary, their social being that determines their consciousness. Systems of stratification as source of inequalities. Some sociologists, however, extend the definition of class to include not only access to the means of production like land, capital, and technologies, but also to the prestige attached to one's social position. Hence, some sociologists writing along the Weberian tradition use the term stratification. When regularly recognized social differences of wealth, color, religion, ethnicity, or gender, for example, become ranked in some hierarchical manner. Sociologists talk about strata, Bruce and Yearly 2006, page 290. Max Weber defined class as a category of individuals who, first, have in common a specific casual component of their life chances insofar. Second, this component is represented exclusively by economic interests in the position of goods and opportunities for income, and third, it is represented under the conditions of the commodity or labor market. I believe that ownership of property is crucial to the definition of class, where class referred to social differences based on economic divisions and inequalities. Status designated the differentiation of groups in the communal sphere in terms of their social honor and social standing by Max Weber. System. The system of social stratification differs from the class in its rigidity and in the basis of legitimacy. It is also called a closed system in contrast with the class system that is relatively open. Membership of caste is ascribed rather than achieved, and social contact between castes is heavily constrained and ritualized, unlike in the class system. In the caste system, the positions of people are already determined at the moment they were born. The class system. Discussed earlier, under the class system, individuals are positioned according to their access to the means of production and contribution to productive labor. People with higher income tend to have children who also have higher income. Parents who can afford to send their children to better schools are promoting the future advantage of their children. To talk about the class system is to talk about the ways in which individuals from a definite family background can advance to a relatively better economic position than their parents. In most class systems, education has become the accepted means to advance one's social mobility. Among Filipino families, education is considered as the ticket to success. This is supported by the theory of education-based meritocracy proposed chiefly by American sociologist Daniel Bell in 1960s. In this theory, education is supposed to be the great status equalizer. Education provides much needed capital to climb the economic ladder. Hence, many Filipino families will sacrifice anything for their children to finish a college degree. This practice is based on the belief that our society is an open society that allows the movement of individuals from a lower class to a relatively higher class. When people are allowed and are capable of moving from one stratum or class to another class, it is called social mobility. Social mobility. Social mobility signifies the movement of people between positions in a system of social stratification. In modern societies, this means the movement of people between social classes is defined by occupational scales. It may occur between generations, as when a girl born into a working class family achieves a middle class occupation, or be the ups and downs for an individual career. Pierre Bourdieu, 1930 to 2002, a French sociologist who dealt extensively with class inequalities by arguing that capital, in its classic Marxist usage, does not refer only to economic assets but also includes cultural, symbolic, and social capital. Cultural capital refers to the forms of knowledge, educational credentials, and artistic taste that a person acquires from family background, which give them higher status in society. Social capital refers to resources based on group membership, relationships, and networks of influence and support. Bourdieu 1984 describes social capital as the aggregate of the actual or potential resources, which are linked to possession of a durable network of more or less institutionalized relationships of mutual acquaintance and recognition. In traditional societies, for instance, individuals are recruited in a bureaucracy on the basis of blood relations. In his book Distinction, 1984, Bourdieu refers to symbolic capital as the acquisition of a reputation for competence and an image of respectability and honorability. Politics. What does politics mean? Why does politics bear a negative connotation, especially when used by well-known politicians, celebrities, and media practitioners? What is the relationship between power and politics? Where does power lie? Who wields power? Who seizes power? What does it mean to be political? What does it take to be politicized? What are the possible ways in which politics and empowerment can mean something meaningful and fruitful for the majority? Politics and social organization. All known societies are organized in ways that facilitate and maintain the everyday life and culture of different social groups. This means that the morality made up of norms, mores, and folkways that people live by are part of an organized system of ways of doing and mixing, are ways of living in a world where each individual needs to mix with each other people. In other words, there are rules unwritten or written that guide people's ways of socializing. This way of inhabiting the world is conceptualized as social relations. Power is a nominal term or another word we use to refer to social relations. This means that the rules for relating socially are observed depending on one's position in society. This is why all social relations are power relations. This is why politics is not even choice that those who can get into. Politics is part and parcel of social life. It shapes the way people live and die. Forms of legitimacy. German sociologist Max Weber identifies three types of legitimacy which concertize the same in its various concrete forms. First is traditional legitimacy or TL, is the kind of moral authority that keeps society together by virtue of custom and habit. This type of legitimacy emphasizes the authority of tradition by virtue of its historical practice by a particular group. This form of rule is understood as historically accepted by its practitioners. This is how we have always done things. Governments or forms of rule that are based on traditional legitimacy are historically continuous, such as monarchies and the traditional legitimacy of customary law that govern tribal societies. Second is charismatic legitimacy or CL. In his book Charisma and Institution Building, Weber studies the transition of power from one regime to another through the seizure of power or revolution. He studies the dimension of regime change or revolution, focusing on a charismatic leader. He argues that seizure of power is often initiated by a leader who questions traditional authority, brings together and leads followers, to oust the old regime and bring forth a new one. Fidel Castro of Cuba's 1959 Revolution, Mao Zedong of the 1949 Chinese Revolution, Vladimir Lenin of 1917 October Russian Revolution. Other examples of charismatic leaders in world history are Zapata, Khomeini, and Mandela. The charismatic leader is often regarded as endowed with exceptional powers and superhuman qualities. Charisma is the quality of political leaders whose individual characteristics set him apart from ordinary people. Highlights that the charismatic leader's authority over her followers can only be maintained and reinforced when solidified in political institutions. This means that as a quality of a leader, charisma must itself undergo institutionalization, the most effective of which are for bureaucracy or modern governments that have replaced the traditional and hereditary rule of monarchs. Rational legal legitimacy or RLL. Authority in this context derives from formal procedures of institutions. This is a type of legitimacy that is based on a government's capacity to use public interest as the rationale for establishing and enforcing law and order. Rational legal legitimacy is therefore the basis of power and leadership of a government that pledges to abide the law and wins consent from the people through public trust. Modern states or governments premise on representative or participative democracies are examples of the kind of authority that is derived from rational legal legitimacy. Betrayal of trust and culpable violation of the Constitution by a government official strips him or her of rational legal authority. This explains the phenomenon of presidents leaving their office due to public clamor and our people power. Authority and power. Authority, control delegated to an individual or group, is the right or privilege granted to you, resides in the post or position. Technical and static, illustrated in organizational charts, flow downwards. Positional, power, control that allows influence on others, comes from who you are, resides in the person or people who use it. Flexible and dynamic, cannot be accurately illustrated, flows in many directions, diffuse. Regions of the Philippine modern state. Modern Principalia, a continuity of leadership recruitment from a tiny minority of elite families and, in spite of democratic elections, members of these families get elected again and again by Dante Simbulan. The ruling elite or the plutocracy refers to any given society's economic and political elite. In this context, the melding of economic and political power is decisive in the formation of the Philippine state and the different regimes or governments that have historically made it up. In an ideal world, governance only requires political acumen or the ability to wield political capital effectively. But the history of colonialism and neo-colonialism has shaped the confluence of economic and political power in shaping the life of a nation. Each province in the Philippines is almost always ruled by political dynasties that rule not only the political life, they also shape and control ordinary people's economic and social life. Go back in history. The Principalia is a product of Spanish colonialism that morphed into the modern Principalia all throughout American colonialism and neocolonialism, up to the institution of the modern Philippine state. Casteism is a system of rule introduced by the Spanish colonizers who ruled the Philippines from 1571 to 1898. While leaders of barangays and datus already existed in the social organization of the various regions in Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao before Spanish colonial rule, this sophisticated system of organization was used by the Spanish colonizers against the colonized. The Spanish colonizers introduced caciquism or the rule of the cacique or chief through local leaders like the datus and cabezas de barangay. In other words, local chiefs were recruited to the Spanish colonial government as local collaborators. They were compensated through the encomienda system or land grants to local caciques. The caciques then started to preserve and reinforce power through getting more land which allowed them to make their constituents, the people, dependent on them. This newly formed local elite group also served as tax collectors who extorted money from the locals, partly for their use and part of it to be surrendered to their Spanish superiors. In the Bonifacio-led 1896 Katipunan Revolution, the Principalia played a counterintuitive role. The 1896 revolution was inspired by the reform movement initiated by the Ilustrados, their intellectual segment of the Principalia who are alienated from the practices and interests of this elite group. They are the young intellectuals who studied in Europe and midst the Philippines. Colonization of Spain, their exposure to the literature and the Enlightenment and the different revolutions in the West, foremost of which is the French Revolution. These alienated young intellectuals would come home to the country to become propagandists of the reform movement against Spanish colonialism. From this movement, the revolutionary Katipunan was born and eventually won the revolution against Spanish colonialism. During the United States of colonization of the Philippines, the campaign to pacify revolutionary anti-colonial forces ensued. The Principalia during this period was comprised of pro-American upper-class Filipinos, who in December 12, 1900s, came together, all 125 of them, to organize the Federalista Party. As part of the pacification campaign, local Filipino elites were also appointed by Americans in different positions in the bureaucracy, culminating in the Commonwealth period. This period marked the institutionalization of the modern Principalia as pillars in the establishment of state institutions in the so-called post-colonial period. This segment of the Principalia has its roots from the land-owning Principalia that collaborated with Spanish colonizer. This is how the modern Principalia became the local ruling elite that occupies seats in local government units, Congress, Senate, and the Malacanang Palace. Contemporary Philippine politicians' preference for foreign investors, partnerships with big business, and as military forces is a disposition that has its historical roots in the making of the modern Principalia, which now comprise the modern Philippine state. Phenomenon of making profits out of one's seat in government, or what is known as bureaucrat capitalism, is a logical trajectory of governance that was instituted during colonial rule, and whose substance and basis, economic power based on land, and later on, entanglement with foreign interest, have yet to be eliminated to make Philippine politics a practice of genuine. Thank you for listening. I'm Charmaine J. Makatwal, your teacher.